its impact in the community, its impact environmentally. I mean, I do think there are other social trends that are good news here for the journalism.
Well, they are. I just think that if there's a solution to this, it's more likely to be one that is enduring because it has some economic, commercial basis of, and it'll probably be a combination. There'll probably be, nonprofits that contribute to the newspaper's reports and augment the kind of reporting they're able to do and things like that. And government actually has been absolutely essential to the newspaper industry because they require notifications of foreclosure and bankruptcy and things like that to be published in a paid circulation newspaper.
So you're saying it's a very lucrative time, really?
Well, it's been the only that's been the only category of advertising that's increased over the last year.
I also think that Clay Shirky had a valuable point here that really for most of the history of journalism in the United States, it was funded by advertising, period. Right? And that there's not going to be a single monolithic solution that's going to replace advertising. It's going to be a wide range of models and approaches.
So I've seen 3 hands, there are probably a lot of hands, but I've seen 3 hands just go up, 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 and I'm going to ask them to speak in, I guess I'll just make up an order. I do not know you by name, but I will in a second, and Betsy Correll and Sam Burness, so I'll get to you. But one of the topics that you guys raised was the role of philanthropy or it came up in the conversation, as a driver of news or a funder of news or a framer of news or something. And several people in this room are in the philanthropic world. And I guess I would just pose a quick response from somebody, if they're willing to say, who works with a foundation, which is, to what extent is foundation support of news a democratic, a positive for democracy? Is anybody willing to speak to that who's in the foundation world? Okay, Adam, go for it.
Sure. I think foundations should serve a role of stepping in and filling a gap and helping prove that something can work, but they shouldn't step in the long haul with journalism. When you look at things like ProPublica or what Kaiser's doing right now, there's no business model. So is philanthropy going to fill this need in an ongoing basis? I don't know if that makes sense and serves the democratic good. It certainly serves the investigative journalist component. Instead, I think philanthropy can try new things. Some of what Knight's doing and things like that can serve an important role.
I mean, I think ultimately, institutions are not really the answer here. Ultimately, I think the answer is about kind of individuals and the kind of culture, the kind of civic culture we want to have in this country and in this world, and what we're going to value and what we're going to be willing to pay for, and how we're going to educate ourselves over the course of our lifetimes. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't see any particular institution working. Generally.
Versus not working. We just want to get there. All right, so the 3 people, go ahead. If you'd identify yourself and...
My name is Sam Mele from the New American Foundation. And I guess the conversation is very much centered around how newspapers are public good, and actually having just moved to DC and seeing the museum for the first time, the Thomas Jefferson quote that they have up on the wall there is brought to mind: if given the choice between government and newspaper, I'd choose the latter. And I guess, Nicco, you had just mentioned that you say institutions are not the answer, and I just wanted to ask both of your opinion, or all 3 of your opinions, on the New York Times article that ran recently discussing how perhaps the answer to newspaper, because we sort of all seem to agree that there's a public service being done, and maybe that's what we're losing. And the New York Times article that talked about how maybe we should turn our newspapers into endowed public, maybe not public in the word government, but an endowed institution that isn't beholden to advertisers or a specific business model, and turn them more into sort of public state, sort of the university model of, funding, and maybe that's where newspapers should turn to. I was just wondering what your opinions were on that.
Well, I think that, I think that will be something that is tried. I think the question is, who's going to put up the money? And I think that as those of you who are, in this world of trying to raise money know that it's harder to get money from wealthy people than some people think it is. I guess my point is this. I believe that foundations have a significant role as a bridge. But I don't think that that's where the solution lies. I really don't. I think that that foundations are not geared to sort of be sustaining. They're geared to start something and then have it work as a model. And I don't think that the idea of a public service is something that is necessarily going to carry the day completely. I think there has to be a perceived value that newspapers and other news organizations provide. But I do believe that people perceive these institutions, if you will. I don't believe Nicco's right about institutions. I think that we need institutions sort of for organizing, if nothing else. And one of the things that's happened over the last couple of years is that, if you probably have read, newspaper circulation has gone, they may have lost nationally 25% of their circulation. Well, that's bad, right? Well, I don't actually think so. I think that statistic is a little bit misleading in this sense. We were in a situation in which everybody was trying to economize, the worst recession since the Depression, and people who subscribed to newspapers got, for the most part, an increase in rates, not a cut in rates, with the value of the newspaper in terms of its quality going down because they've been getting rid of reporters, and at a time when they could get exactly everything on print for free online, for nothing. And yet 75% stayed. 75% paid the increased price. I consider that to be at least a gesture that says there's something that we value here that we want to keep alive. Now, they've got to prove that it's worth it, but I believe that the public service, the perceived public service, is the value that will have to be proven, and it's going to be proven, I believe, by journalism. I don't think it's going to be proven by, junk.
Let's take, so Betsy had a question, and then go to Sam. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is something that's been skirted around a little bit, and it's not really looking at foundations taking responsibility for the news, but the trend for a number of nonprofits to be the source of news. For example, Human Rights Watch has more researchers in Africa than the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal combined. And they use those researchers to write their reports. And I guess I'd like to hear...
I would expand it, not just nonprofits, but I think more corporations are doing a form of journalism than ever before. More and more corporations are publishing and writing things on their website.